Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. This is, we're just going to let everybody get into the waiting room here, from the waiting room, and then we will get started. For those of you joining on Facebook, thank you so much for joining us for Northern Kentucky History Hour with Behringer-Crawford Museum. We will get started momentarily. Good evening and welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. For those of you just joining, we are going to start here in just a moment, just letting everyone into the meeting here. Let's see, as we wait, I'll let everyone know that we are also streaming on Facebook. So if you ever want to watch a past episode, you can go to Behringer-Crawford's Facebook page and watch there, or our YouTube channel. All right, I think we are going to get started here. My name is Tara Johnson Noem, and I am a member of Behringer-Crawford Museum's Board of Trustees. I see a number of other trustees here in the meeting, and so I just want to say thanks to all of them for their support, and of course, thanks to the museum staff. Without their help, this would absolutely not be possible. We are so blessed to have a great museum and a great staff for it here in Northern Kentucky at Behringer-Crawford Museum. Just going to do a couple of housekeeping items here as we get started. First of all, I want to thank all of our financial supporters. Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, Arts Wave, the Kentucky Arts Council, the Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation. So thanks to all of them. And thanks to you, our members. We know that more than 30 people have become members of the museum during this pandemic, thanks to being members and watching of History Hour. And so we just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you who have become members. If you're not yet a member, you can go to that website, bcmuseum.org, and find out how to do that. Let's see, everyone is muted if you're joining us on the Zoom, but we still want you to take part. And if you're on Facebook, we want you to take part as well. So add your questions and comments to the chat, and I will make sure to ask those during our, at the end of the presentation, rather. And now I have the pleasure of introducing my favorite guests that we have had so far in, this is episode 32. And I can say that, though many of our past guests are with us tonight, and we love you all. But tonight's guest is someone extra special, and he is my husband, Shane Noem. Shane has kind of unlikely come to this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how he came to do this research. He actually has more than a decade of experience working with and for local, state, and federal government offices and campaigns and nonprofits. He most recently served in senior roles in the re-election campaign for Senator Mitch McConnell. He is an Eagle Scout and an active volunteer for the Danbury Council, Boy Scouts of America, where he is the committee chairman of our children's Cub Scout Pack, and also a member of the Trailblazer District Committee. He was also a co-author and committee chairman of the 2019 Camp Friedlander Centennial History publication. And that's where a lot of this research that you're going to hear about tonight comes from. So without further ado, I'm probably going to go check on our kids, and Shane, you can take it from here.
Thanks, babe. I was just going to say, where are the kids? But nice to be downstairs with you all upstairs. Nice to join everybody tonight. I met most of you by email, and I thank you all for being a part of the History Hour. But it's fun to be on this side of the equation for a change. I'm going to talk a lot tonight about the history of Scouts, but I want to do this presentation with something in mind that I have no experience whatsoever in research. I am not a historian, other than I like to read and listen to audiobooks, and I've never really done any kind of major research projects outside of school. So I want you to know that everything that I've been able to uncover here and share with you all tonight is not some grandiose project that was done with a series of interns and a staff. This is just something I did after the kids went to bed a couple years ago as part of a committee project, and we were all amateurs that put this together. So this is, I don't want you to think that you can't do research. I want that to be the message: is if I can do this, you could do this. So I'm going to jump right in. First, I want to thank all the scouts and scouters. I see a couple of you all on here tonight. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did putting it together. But as Tara mentioned, this project originates from when I was part of the Centennial Committee that worked on honoring Camp Friedlander, the Danbury Council's flagship camp, after 100 years of operation. We wrote that book starting 2 years ago. It took us about a year to put together. But the first comprehensive history of the Danbury Council hadn't been, it was done in the 50s, and there had not really been a major compilation of it since then. We had a scouter by the name of Jack Simon in Ohio who would be right under the pen name the Old Scoutmaster in the fireside chats. And that would give everybody a snippet of it. Most of us that worked on this committee, we were inspired by his stories over the years. And that's what kind of gave us the inspiration to put this together, was his stories as we were scouts coming up through the ranks. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. I've got some slides and pictures. More than anything, I wanted to show you all pretty pictures. You don't need to see my my mug. So we're going to jump right into it then. So this presentation, let's see here. We're going to break it down into a couple different sections, but I want to start off with our trivia question. This is maybe a simple one, so the first person to put it in the chat bar will get it. But I wanted to give a little scouting trivia for you. Who is the only U.S. president to have been an Eagle Scout? The only U.S. president to have been an Eagle Scout. We'll tell you the answer at the end. I'm going to break my presentation down into a couple sections. First is national and international scouting history and the founding. I'm going to talk a little bit about early Cincinnati scouting, and then I'm going to talk about the history of Northern Kentucky scouting up until it joined the Danbury Council as we know it today, which includes Ohio, 12 counties in Ohio and Kentucky. And then I'm going to conclude with the history of the camps and a few things I learned. So bear with me. It's a lot of content. You know, with most of our presenters who I envy their knowledge. I'm going to be reading some of my notes because I just don't have this stuff saved up in the noggin. All right, for those of you who have been around scouting for some time, you've heard the tales of Daniel Carter Beard, William D. Boyce, James E. West, Ernest Thomas Seton, and Lord Robert Baden-Powell. These men, their vision is what created the modern scouting movement. As the stories go, Powell, an Englishman of Boer Wars fame, established the first scout camp in 1907 on Brownsea Island to test his ideas for his book, Scouting for Boys. In 1909, American newspaperman Boyce was, as the story goes, lost in the foggy streets of London, only to be rescued by an unknown scout who guided Boyce to his destination. Impressed by the lone scout's refusal to accept payment for his good deeds, Boyce returned to the United States, inspired to establish a program for young men. Naturalist Seton, who founded the Woodcraft Indians in 1902, worked with Powell in 2006 on the concept of scouting and went on to write the first Boy Scout manual. He'd become the first Chief Scout. And New York-based West, a lawyer and advocate for children, would bring a special set of organizational skills together to establish the Boy Scouts of America. West would pair up with Beard, who was an artist and the organizer of the Sons of Daniel Boone in 1910. And then the Boy Scouts was born. The national office was based in New York City, where both Beard and West lived at the time. And they would purchase advertisements in every major newspaper across the country. This fanned the flames of the movement, and it took off like wildfire. Going to talk about Beard. This is a familiar name for anybody that's grown up in Northern Kentucky or lived in Covington at all. Beard was born in 1850 at 17 West 9th Street in Cincinnati. In 61, his family moved to 322 East 3rd Street in Covington, where Beard loved exploring the banks of the Ohio and Licking rivers. At the time, there wasn't as much development in Covington, and you were a lot closer to the wilderness than you would imagine. Beard was an artist and a writer, skills that he would later monetize. In 1878, he earned his living by illustrating and eventually became known for his works in books such as A Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. In 1882, after arriving in New York, Beard wrote The American Boy's Handy Book, a book that gave instructions and advice on animals, outdoors, tents, knots, fishing, and more. The book was very successful, and it would begin a very long career of working with young men. Beard would go on to write 20 more books, including his autobiography, which if you haven't read it, it's very fascinating. Hardly a Man is Now Alive, and it tells a lot of his growing up in Covington. He would form the Sons of Daniel Boone that would later evolve into the Boy Scouts, and boys were organized into forts, similar to what we know of as patrols today. Uniforms were based on pioneer and frontiersman outfits, and they would earn notches and top notches, very similar to merit badges and ranks. In 1910, Beard merged his organization, then known as the Boy Pioneers of America, into the slowly growing Boy Scouts of America. Beard would go on to become one of the first national commissioners, serving scouting for over 30 years, earning his place as a scouting legend. Beard's legacy was put on display in northern Kentucky in the 1980s with the dedication of the Daniel Carter Beard Memorial Bridge. The bridge most of us know as the Big Mac Bridge, recognized by its golden arches, similar to the McDonald's restaurant. Bridge connects Newport and Cincinnati. Scouts dedicated the bridge by taking a canoe trip from Newport all the way to Frankfort, Kentucky. I was fortunate enough to meet one of the scouts that was on that trip about 5 or 6 years ago, and he said they were having so much fun on their trip, they actually had to pull out of the river before they got to the mouth of the Kentucky River, and they had to truck it all the way up to Frankfort, where they put in about a half a mile from the capital. So they didn't quite make it the whole way, but that's what happens when you're out on a canoe sometimes. In October of 1988, the Covington, Kentucky Boy Scout Plaza was dedicated in front of the Dan Beard Boyhood Home. The dedication was also the rededication of the Dan Beard Hike, which turned into the Riverwalk Trail. You'll see here's the map of the modern trail. The original trail actually started down south of Camp Springs, and scouts would hike all the way up to the house from there. Covington, the house was fallen into disrepair over the years, and Covington attorney Phil Tolliver purchased it and renovated the house. Tolliver later sold it to Mark Holt, local historian and engineer, who I believe still resides in the house today. Other than the master bedroom and the kitchen, the house is pretty much to the time period of when Beard's family would have been living in it. I've been in it one time, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous home down there with a great view. I can only imagine growing up in that location. On Saturday mornings in the spring and fall, you can still see scouts hiking this trail and taking the selfie with Uncle Dan as a bronze statue sits outside. Now I'm going to jump to scouting in the early years in Cincinnati. Scouting in Cincinnati predates Northern Kentucky only by a few months, but as the scouting movement was getting its start in England in 1908, the U.S. and Cincinnati was a really early adopter. There's a lot of controversy in the scouting history world, but it is believed that Kentucky was home to the first formal Boy Scouts of America troop. Burnside, Kentucky likes to claim that, but there's a troop in Frankfort that likes to debate that. The earliest record of scouting activity in the region was found in the Dan Beard Council archives, which are very well preserved, in early board meeting minutes and in local newspapers. They note a Troop 1 in Norwood, Troop 2 in Hyde Park, and Troop 3 downtown. These early troops were chartered directly with the national headquarters in New York. Records show as Stacy Holmes, the scoutmaster of Troop 3, was serving in some leadership capacity for the Boy Scouts and was part of organizing the Scoutmasters Club. Early council records show that in 1916, at the age of 27, future United States Senate Majority Leader and Republican presidential candidate Robert Taft served as the council president. Following his tenure, he attempted to join the Army, but was denied because of poor eyesight. Instead, joined the FDA's legal staff, where he met Herbert Hoover and began his career in public service. John B. Hollister served as the council treasurer at the same time. It's safe to assume that these two young men forged a bond at that juncture in their lives that went on to form the law firm that's still in operation today, Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister. During World War I, scouts in Cincinnati were recruited to sell war bonds and identify black walnut trees. The federal government had taken inventory of the trees as they were the best kind of wood for propellers and gun stocks because they could withstand the vibrations. As of May 1918, 150 trees had been identified by scouts that had not previously been discovered, which was a real help to the war effort. On August 6, 1927, scouts would get to enjoy the attention of a world celebrity as Charles Lindbergh came to Cincinnati for a parade in his honor. In May of that same year, Lindbergh had become the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic, earning himself instant international stardom. 100 scouts met him on the tarmac at Lunken as he, quote, swooped in, flying his signature plane, the Spirit of St. Louis. Members of the tribe of Cunier, the Honor Camper Society for Scouting, would present him with a handmade war bonnet headdress with the words Cunier Cincinnati and Kwan. A little bit of research. I'm bold enough to say this Kwan, I found it appears to be from a couple different Native American languages, but it translates loosely to silver fox. So I thought that was pretty funny. He was then inducted as an honorary member of the tribe. This headdress is still on display. You can see it in this one picture. It's still on display in St. Louis at the Jefferson Memorial Museum as part of their Lindbergh collection. Hopping on the south side of the river, I'm going to talk about Northern Kentucky scouting in the early years. The earliest records of Northern Kentucky scouting can be found in a Kentucky Post article dated from July of 1911. It stated that a Reverend W.C. Lindsay organized the Newport Scouts and was planning an encampment nearby. Scout troops were rapidly set up across all of Covington and Newport. Largely, it took off really because of the rich pioneer history in the region and a lot of the relics of pioneer past. It wasn't a hard sell to convince kids to get excited about the stories of Dan Boone and Simon Kenton. In 1917, a $10,000 capital campaign was initiated to fund the scouting movement and operations for 3 years, including the hiring of a staff person. The campaign was chaired by Captain James Tobias, or Toby Hatfield, the owner of the very profitable Hatfield Coal Company. Hatfield, having 3 sons, had a passion for helping young men be successful. Fueled by his personal acquaintance with Beard, his passion blossomed into a genuine lifelong interest in Boy Scout work. Hatfield teamed up with a local grocer by the name of George L. Hill. You may be familiar with the George W. Hill Company in Covington, and John C. Herman to kickstart the campaign and propel scouting in Northern Kentucky. The campaign was directed by a national field agent who had moved to the region to help scouting. His name was Arthur E. Roberts. I came in contact with Roberts in my research because he was the first camp director of Camp Friedlander in Cincinnati. And so it was a surprise when we stumbled across that he helped organize Northern Kentucky scouting as well. The savvy of Roberts, Hatfield, Hill, and Herman resulted in a quickly pledged $10,000 in less than 2 hours at a dinner fundraiser. They hired Ernest J. Morris as the scout executive, and the creation of the Covington Council initiated at that point. It surprised nobody that Hatfield was the first president of the Covington Council. The first office for the Scouts was located at the Covington YMCA on Madison. That was from 1913 to 1920. It later moved to the Coppins Department Store, also on Madison, until 21. In the 20s, now serving Boone, Kenton, and Campbell counties, Northern Kentucky scouting was rapidly growing. In February of 1931, Bracken, Pendleton, Grant were also added to the Covington Council's territory. The next year, Mason, Owen, Robertson, and Fleming counties were added, with Gallatin additionally in 1944. Bracken, Fleming, Mason, and Robertson were transferred to the Scioto Area Council based in Portsmouth in 1951. So they are no longer part of this territory. Northern Kentucky Scouting Headquarters moved a couple times as well. I mentioned it was in the Coppins building. It was in Suite 507 for anybody that stayed the night at the Hotel Covington. Then it moved across the street to a small upstairs office on Pike Street, conveniently next door to the George W. Hill Company. For most of the 20s and 30s, it leased space in the Masonic building on the corner of 4th and Scott, eventually moving to the Covington Bank and Trust building, and then across the Licking to a building next to the courthouse in Newport. DeVue Park in Covington was a frequent place for scouting activity. You could see on a lot of weekends and time in the summer, scouts hiking and camping up there. Scouts worked with the Covington Rotary to host the annual Easter egg hunt in the park for many years. An early Scout executive even wrote in the Kentucky Post in support of developing a golf course in Devou Park. He wrote, "Scouts would make fine caddies." Jamborees, then known as camperols, were held in the park, where the Dries Pavilion is today. In August of 34, Dan Beard himself was the honored guest at a camperol in the park. For more than 2,000 scouts to attend, it was quite impressive. And all of the scouts in attendance then joined Beard, who was 84 at the time, as he walked from Devou Park to his home a couple miles away. This was the last time Beard would be in Covington and visit his boyhood home until he died in 1941 at the age of 90. We mentioned, Boy Scouts that most people know, but you've also got the Cub Scout program for younger scouts. It started in 1930 to provide programming for that younger audience that wasn't being served. The first troop in the tri-state area was in Marymount, but it would quickly come across the river. If anybody knows Ken Harper, the former state representative and Secretary of State from Northern Kentucky, he is thought to be the first Cub Scout. He was a lone scout, meaning there wasn't a pack, but his mom helped him through the program. Now I'm going to jump over to the Northern Kentucky camps. This was the part that most excited me in my research, just because growing up in Northern Kentucky, I only knew of Camp Michaels in Boone County. I had no idea that there were so many different camps. Let me jump ahead here. I think I forgot to change some slides. Tara's come down to remind me. Thank you. All right, news articles from the 1910s and 20s make several references to Boy Scout camps in Northern Kentucky prior to the establishment of the first permanent summer camp. In 1912, Troop 2 of Latonia spent a week camp in Independence. This was a camp that they would have organized themselves without a staff or without the professional office helping. There's also references to scouts camping on the Gunpowder Creek in the late 19-teens. And in 1915, a summertime camping carnival took place at the old Latonia racetrack. It was more of a public exhibition than what we think of as a modern summer camp. From 1914 to 1918, scouts attended camp in Visalia at Grants Bend. If you're not familiar with Grants Bend, it's a ridge along the west side of the Licking River, surrounded by water on three sides. In 1919, scouts attended camp at George L. Hill's property in Morning View. Not much is known about this short-term camp, but there's reason to believe it was the same property that would become a permanent scout camp a decade later. Rocky Ridge Reservation in Petersburg is one that really fascinated me. I grew up out near Big Bone and just never heard stories of this. The first reference to this camp and any permanent scout camp comes in 1920 in an article written in the Kentucky Post. It was titled, "Prepare Camp, Scouts Will Find Things Ready in Petersburg." In the article, it talks about local scoutmasters who built a mess hall, which would be finished by scouts that week. The mess hall was screened on all sides, and there was a headquarters office and supply store built. Most of the materials were donated by Covington businessmen. The property was located on a ridge overlooking the Ohio in what was believed to be above Lowry's Island and below Split Rock. I've pinpointed on a map where I think it might be, but I've not been able to do the deed research to confirm. A separate article referred to it as Mrs. Grant's property, a mile and a half above Aurora. So I think it said, like I said, we can really zero in, but I just need to confirm those details. Scouts would enjoy what were called canyons on the property, or deep ridges they could play in. Property was 30 miles from Covington, which made for a really long hike, but scouts would hike it. They would depart the city and spend their first night near the Anderson Ferry in Constance. They would finish their hike the second day. Scouts were given the opportunity to win a free week at Rocky Ridge by entering a birdhouse building competition. The birdhouses would be on display in the Coppins department store. More than 100 scouts attended the first camp in 1921 and over 200 in 1922. There was great excitement in July of 21 when a water pump was put in, so the scouts didn't have to bring their water up the hill 60 feet. Baseball games were an exciting pastime at Rocky Ridge, but likely due to its distance, this was not an ideal camp, and it closed a few years later. In February of 1922, a scout executive by the name of Stanley Tarrant announced at a gathering of Covington business leaders that a new camp would be found in Butler, Kentucky. This camp was simply referred to as Camp Butler. Marketing for the camp included floats and parades, advertising the summer experience. The Covington Rotary Club furnished most of the equipment for the camp. On July 2nd of 22, Governor Edwin Morrow was expected to dedicate the camp. But there was a little bit of surprise and much disappointment when he didn't show. So I believe, I'm looking into this as well, but I believe it was a miscommunication as compared to an intentional snub. Activities included swimming, boating, baseball, map and compass. Each day of the camp week had its own headline event. This is pretty similar to how camps operate today, 100 years later. Friday night was stunt night that included a hare and hound chase. Saturday was a campfire in the amphitheater. Sunday was Venetian night on the lake with decorated boats. Never done that, but that sounds awesome. Monday was scout training in a camp circus. Tuesday was stunts and comedy in the mess hall. Wednesday was Indian night with the burial of the Indian chief. Thursday night was advertising night. I have no idea what that was, but that doesn't sound nearly as exciting as the other nights. And Friday night was skit night, and Saturday concluded with what they called a monster campfire overlooking Butler. The camp even had its own newspaper titled The Daily Blade. Camp Jt Hatfield is the next camp that was developed in the timeline. From 1923 to 27, scouts would attend this camp, sometimes referred to as Camp Northern Kentucky. As mentioned earlier, it was named after James Tobias Hatfield, the coal magnate. And this property was located in Morning View, a little further north than Butler, so that would have been the incentive for them to move. It was located on a Mr. L.D. Brady's property. Locally, it's known as Brady's Lake. It was done on an annual lease basis. Therefore, the council did not own any of the camping property. It was a cost of $7 a week or $13 for 2 weeks. We've come a long way in what happens at camp, but the costs have gone up as well. It's about $100 for a scout to attend a week at camp today. In the 1924 season, scouts participated in a weekly treasure hunt around the southern end of Kenton County. Scouts would feast on turtle soup made with real turtles, and Captain Hatfield would visit the camp frequently and bring melons for the scouts to eat as a treat. Scouts would attend church service at the local congregations in Morning View. Before the summer of 26, a new dining hall was built to seat 125. The room would also be utilized for instruction in inclement weather. Scout executive Edgar Stallsmith served as the camp director and Red Cross trained medic. Efforts to locate this property haven't been successful yet. Again, I need to do some deed work, but I believe we've zeroed in on a couple of properties in Morning View that it could have been. Camp George W. Hill. This was one of my favorite to research because, again, I just didn't know it existed. And I'm sure there's people alive today that attended this camp. So I'd love to hear from anybody that has heard of this camp. It was set on 48.5 acres in the community of Morning View. It was a 20-mile drive or train ride from Covington. It was located off of Morning View Fiskburg Road, which is now known as Rich Road, close to where Camp Hatfield is believed to have been. We mentioned George Hill earlier, sometimes known as George Jr., the prominent Covington grocer and businessman. He was also one of the foundings of the Covington Council. A group of local businessmen, including Hatfield, gathered in September of 1917 to begin a campaign to purchase and establish property for scouting in Northern Kentucky. Ernest J. Morris made a public request seeking for, quote, a large-visioned, public-spirited American to bequeath to the growing band of scouts in Covington a small tract of land to be developed into a permanent camp that shall assist in making the successive generations of Covington boys 100% American. I thought that was interesting considering where we were in the world at the time with the Great War or the First World War. A Covington family would soon partake in their request. George L. Hill's father was the founder of the grocery business, moved from Grant County. George W. Hill was his name. He bought the property in Morning View in 1895 from Fifth Ward Building Association after the bank foreclosed on a George Mullins during the economic depression. Upon the death of George W. Hill, George L. Hill inherited the property. So George Hill Jr., who was on the council's executive committee when they were looking for property and later served as council president, worked with Morris to make the property into a scout camp. In 29, Hill sold the property to the Northern Kentucky Council for $1 with the stipulation that it would revert back to him or his descendants if they deemed it surplus or no longer needed. Hill wanted to name the camp in honor of his father. It's believed by the current owner of the property that the Boy Scouts were informally using this property for weekend camping and maybe some camping since the inception of scouting in the region. The camp was dedicated on June 23, 1929, with a crowd of 3,000 and over 250 scouts. Festivities included a performance by the Fort Thomas Scout Band and a flag raising ceremony. The first week at camp began the next day with 40 scouts enrolled. The first summer saw a total of 330 scouts, which was an increase of over 100 from the time that they were participating in Camp Northern Kentucky or Camp Hatfield. First director was Harold Stallsmith, the son of the scout executive at the time. The camp served as the official summer camp for the council for over 19 years. Some scouts would arrive by car, but most would arrive by railroad from Covington. They would depart the Pike Street station at 7:06 a.m. and arrive at Morning View Station. They would take a quarter-mile walk down Morning View Fitchburg Road from the train station. They would pass a cattle pasture on one side and the camp's iconic lake on the other. In the early years, scouts would enter through a wooden stockade you can see here. Talk about going to camp. Could you imagine going to a summer camp and walking through a gate like that? That'd just be a cool experience. 3 wells were dug on the property for fresh drinking water. In 1930, Kentucky and the surrounding region experienced a serious drought that brought only 57% of the usual rainfall that spring. The council opened up to the community free, unrestricted access to the wells for the duration of the drought. Locals would bring milk jugs and fill them up to return to their home so they could have water to drink with and cook with. All 3 of the wells are still in place today, and a water test that was conducted in the 80s actually showed it was by far higher quality water than normal well water because it tapped into glacial water pockets because they dug them so deep. Scout activities were similar to that of other camps at the time, but the highlight of a Scouts Week was swimming and boating. This wasn't something that every kid in Covington got to do at the time. Aquatics would take place in the large man-made lake built on the eastern edge of the property. It was dug in 1928 in a naturally low-lying area by a team of mule and trip buckets. For many years, the lake was crowned with a 30-foot tall diving board lashed together by scouts. I'm sorry, but there's no way I would have climbed up on that thing. I'm afraid of swimming to begin with, much less climbing on something that a bunch of scouts made 30 foot in the air. It's really cool, but that would have been terrifying if you're not a good swimmer. And scout leaders from Fort Thomas donated the first set of boats and oars. As the council and the Northern Kentucky Scouting movement grew, it became clear that the property was not large enough for all Northern Kentucky Scouts to enjoy. One newspaper article said that Camp Hill had become too small for the demand each summer and swimming was not adequate for a large summer camp. Following the creation of Camp Powderhorn in 1944, Camp Hill had outlived its life as a summer camp and was deemed surplus. According to the deed as mentioned, it would revert back to the owners. They chose to let it stay in the council's hands and sell for a profit to fund scouting for a few more years. We're going to get into Camp Powderhorn here in a minute, but I did want to mention Larry Maxey. He owns the property today, and they've run Maxey cattle farms on there. And he's done a great job of A, preserving the property, and B, preserving a lot of the heritage in scouting, even though he's not involved in scouting. He's got some plaques and things they've discovered and they've dug up over the years that he really cherishes and has been gracious enough to share with me. Camp Powderhorn, better known as Camp Michaels. I'd be willing to bet there's some of you on here like myself that have camped and stayed a lot of cold nights at Camp Michaels. Going to get into this a little bit. I'm just checking my time here. Okay, 7:05. In 1941, the Northern Kentucky Council Camping Committee began a search for the perfect location for a new reservation. The plan was for a new property that could become a summer camp and headquarters for the Northern Kentucky Scouts. Campaign leaders thought that plenty of funds for purchasing the property would become available following the conclusion of World War II. A capital campaign was created and chaired by Covington businessman Arthur Eilerman with the goal of raising $85,000. Camp George W. Hill operated after the arrival of the new property for 5 years as the capital campaign was underway. Industrialist and philanthropist Frank L. Michaels, whose two sons, Lewis and Lawrence, had both been scouts in their youth, would come to the call and help with this property. Michaels had served on the council finance committee and had been known to donate plaques, awards, and flagpoles from his bronze company to the council and to Camp Hill. Knowing the council's desire to purchase a camp, Michaels approached the council's leadership unsolicited with the proposal to donate enough property to establish a, quote, premier scout camp, and that they did. The property was originally given under an anonymous name, a friend of scouting. However, after some persuasion from a friend and the council president, Michaels agreed to allow his name to be used in the news release. In 1944, an initial 197 acres was donated for Camp Powderhorn. This article, you'll see a newspaper article in the top left. We recently came across this and discovered that for at least a period of time, it was known as the Boone County Boy Scout Reservation, which we didn't know. The property was known to contain, it was located on the best 3 miles of Gunpowder Creek in rural Boone County. The property was known to contain the Old Buffalo Trace, or a bison path that bison took as they crossed the Ohio River to get to Big Bone Lick. Scouts would later hike this familiar path as part of a nationally recognized and medaled trail. The name Powderhorn came from the original property boundaries, which were in the shape of a pioneer-era gunpowder holder, traditionally carved from animal horns. This, combined with the fitting location on Gunpowder Creek, made for an appropriate name. The capital campaign for Powderhorn began with high hopes of hitting its lofty goal of $85,000, $70,000, which would go to building the camp and the council headquarters. It was projected, you can see this picture to the right, that was the original blueprints for it, and it had a lot more structures on it than there are today. Unfortunately, after the war, there was a housing boom and construction prices went through the roof, and the original estimates were no longer viable, and it made that goal of developing the camp to its original vision not obtainable. Let's see, in 1953, the council had amassed more than 390 acres and invested in a dam that would allow for boating on Gunpowder Creek. A few years later, water would push around the dam, making it ineffective for a couple decades. In 2018, it was actually removed as part of a Gunpowder Creek natural reclamation project. Through the campaign, the fundraising campaign, Powderhorn operated as a Boy Scout camp. This was mostly in the 40s and 50s, up until the merger occurred with the Cincinnati Area Council. During these times, the Order of the Arrow, the new Camping Honor Society, played a large role in camp life, and merit badge achievement was a main focus. At this time, there was no water filtration system, and the main entrance to the camp was a rugged one. In 1958, Frank Michaels was named the co-chair of the now regional, so Kentucky and Ohio, capital campaign titled Operation Scout Camp. And their goal was to raise $785,000 to invest in all 3 of the council camps. Some of the funds were planned to go to Powderhorn as well as Camp Friedlander and Camp Craig. In '59, a new water system would be added and the service road. They were both dedicated that year. The road is the iconic road that we drive down today with the Scout Law lining it. The previous road is now mostly private property, but is still named Camp Michaels Drive. And it's about a quarter mile east of the current entrance. In 1965, following the death of Frank Michaels, Powderhorn was renamed Camp Michaels in his honor. In '76, as part of another capital campaign, a land use study was conducted on the future of Michaels. Placing the property up for sale was strongly considered, but as you can imagine, it stirred great emotion in Northern Kentucky Scouters, and several meetings took place, and there were actually news articles written about the tension, and there was a discussion about splitting off from the Cincinnati Council. The idea was eventually abandoned, as was the idea of selling the property. the council determined the best option for the property was to keep it for rustic, weekend, and overnight camping, with Camp Friedlander becoming the flagship property in Loveland. Since 1944, a majority of Michael's use has been for weekend and wilderness camping. Through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, Cub Scout day camp would take place there. Boy Scout camporees, junior leader training, and national youth leader training, as well as wood badge courses for adults would be held there. In 2007, an additional 70 acres were added as part of the Inspiring Achievements capital campaign. This provided important vehicle access to and backcountry access to the northwest side of the property. The Gunpowder Creek does not have a bridge across it. Therefore, in 2017, a $10 million capital campaign began to add needed infrastructure, including sewer and water lines and road infrastructure, as well as a bridge and a training center. As of the writing of the book, the capital campaign was a little under halfway there. They are now over halfway to their goal. So I'm very excited to see the progress being made on that. And the training center is, I believe, going to be dedicated either at the end of this year or early next year, if I saw the last update correctly. Wanted to talk about two last camps very briefly before I kind of conclude here with some closing thoughts. One was a camp that we discovered through this research process that nobody that I've talked to has heard of, and I'd love to discover more information on this. We've talked a lot about Michael's and his role in scouting. Well, the time he was donating the property for Camp Michael's in Boone County, in 1944, he donated an additional 8 acres in downtown Covington for the use of Black and colored scouts and urban scouts that couldn't go out to the Boone County location. This was referred to as the African American camp for many years and in the newspaper articles. The property was in southwest Covington on a hilltop overlooking both Latonia and Covington, and it originally was exclusively for African American scouts. The camp infrastructure included a troop lodge, tentage, shelters, showers, and water lines, which consisted of a total of $5,000 in investments. Michaels noted in his donation that scouts could walk to it from Latonia, whereas the Boone County camp could only be accessed by vehicles. Like I said, little is known on this property, and it's not believed to have operated very long, but I believe it was at the split in Kentucky 16 and Kentucky 17, and newspaper articles refer to it as an area referred to as Old Parks Hill, different than Park Hills. So if anybody knows anything about that, send me an email. I'd love to chat with you. And then the last camp I wanted to talk about was Camp James T. Hatfield. Now, this is a different Camp Hatfield. This is a Camp Hatfield that never was. In the 70s and 80s, Danbury Council was considering receiving a large gift in the form of a farm in rapidly developing suburban Edgewood. The 40-acre farm, which housed a modest log cabin and a pond that belonged to the late Captain James T. Hatfield, was offered up by Miss Virginia Hatfield on behalf of her and her sister, both Hatfield's daughters. In 75, they wrote that the proposed camp was to be used specifically for urban outreach programs and Cub Scouting. This was considered to be a supplement to the Danbury Scout Reservation, which housed Friedlander and Camp Craig, which was nearing capacity at the time. This would allow for an additional 3,000 or 4,000 scouts a summer. Discussions were held with the Northern Kentucky Girl Scouts for joint use of the property and to build a Girl Scout headquarters on the property. A capital campaign was considered for 1984 for a total of $250,000 to invest in fencing, roads, water, sewer, and a ranger's residence. But unfortunately, for various reasons, including the recent acquisition of Camp Hook through a merger with a council north of Cincinnati, the decision was abandoned and they would not sell. At the same time, they decided not to sell Michael's. So in December of '86, Ms. Hatfield again approached the council about receiving the property as a donation with the intent of selling it and the funds going into an endowment in her father's name. The property has since been developed into the Presswick subdivision for anybody that lives there. The fund still exists today, and income from that fund continues to fund scouting long after Hatfield's original contribution. And Hatfield is memorialized in a beautiful display in the Scout Achievement Center in Evendale, Ohio. So kind of wrapping things up here before we take some questions, I wanted to jump to Scouts today and some resources used. So scouting today, Danbury Council serves 23,000 scouts in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Northern Kentucky. There's a total of 12 counties that the territory makes up. Their headquarters is in Evendale. It's a gorgeous building. It is LED certified, so it's a sustainable property. We still have Camp Michaels and the Camp Friedlander, the Danbury Scout Reservation properties. Scouts BSA and Family Scouting is the newest addition to the program. Anybody that has not been involved in Cub Scouts or Scouts BSA for a long time will recognize the addition of young women into the program, which as a dad of a daughter, I'm very excited that my daughter will get a chance to participate in the program that I got to be a part of. And STEM and STEAM projects are becoming a big part of the program. So the engineering and the mathematics and arts programs, they've become a great addition with some new belt loops and merit badges. Now I want to talk about some of the resources I use. And again, these are things that anybody can use for your own research projects. The faces and places are incredible on the Kenton County Public Library's website. It's a great archive of images dating back decades and decades. The Kenton County Library also has a great archive of newspapers. There's a lot of online newspaper viewing services that you can look at 100-year-old papers, but there's nothing like looking at it in the actual print. You don't get the grain that you do online, and it's really easy to pull up when you go down to the Covington location. The Danbury Council did a really good job of preserving council board meeting minutes going back 100 years. Candidly, I was quite surprised to see how much information was still in their possession. And to have the foresight to hang on to that all these years, much credit goes to them. There was also a scrapbook of images that belonged to Edgar Friedlander. That provided a lot of insight into Scouts' roles in the flood of 37 and a lot of different aspects to the Friedlander side of the research. And then the Hatfield records. The Hatfield family also donated a large volume of records to the Danbury Council that they have today. Surprises. I mentioned earlier Arthur Roberts' role. He was kind of a legend for me growing up, adoring the founders of Camp Friedlander. So it was neat to see his ties in Kentucky. The Lindbergh photos and headdresses, those were only rumors that we had heard. The Danbury Council also had a relationship of sorts with Wilbur Wright of the Wright brothers. I mentioned Taft. Neil Armstrong had received a couple honorary awards from the council. And then Speaker of the House, Nicholas Longwell. I thought this was a really cool story. Scouts from Friedlander carved from an oak tree on the camp property a gavel when he became the Speaker of the House, and he gavelled in a session of Congress with the gavel that they made for him. The name the Filson Council, I don't think I mentioned this in the presentation, but most of us that kind of geek out about Boy Scout history, we only knew of it being the Cincinnati Council, but there was a period of time where it was known as the Filson Council after the founder that mapped most of Kentucky in the pioneer days. The totem pole you see on your slide here, that was actually in Washington Park in Cincinnati, right across from the original downtown scout office. And Roberts carved that himself, and or Roberts and other scouts, I should say, carved that himself. And it was erected in the park for many years, and it was relocated out to Friedlander afterwards. Some of the early camps on the Cincinnati side and the Kentucky side, there's just not a lot of records to be found on them. So finding the newspaper references to them was a real surprise. And I mentioned the original road into Michaels. I'd driven down there 1,000 times and had no clue that the original road was different. The unresolved research that I want to dig back into is I really want to learn more about that camp in Covington for African-American scouts. There was a similar camp called Camp Superior in Ohio that was for African-American scouts as well. But I just had never heard of this and really want to establish the property owner who sold it to Michaels, and if there's any material existing from the programs there. The early camps in Morning View, I want to do a deep dive into their exact properties, and the early Boone County ones. I'd like to go out and put some eyes on those ridges and see what a campsite on a hilltop looking over the Ohio would look like. This plaque showing here, this was dug up, I mentioned on the Camp Hill property. Larry Maxey found, I think his mother found it when she was digging in the garden. And it was believed to be near the flagpole, honoring a scout that died during World War I. He said that there was another marker on that property honoring a different scout for a different reason, and think it was lost to time, and he thinks it was stolen, but I'd love to know what other scout was honored. And then the full histories, I'd like to compile a full history of those founders. I don't know much about John Herman, but Hatfield, Michaels, and Hill, I'd like to, over the next couple of years, round out some of that research. And then I mentioned the book. If anybody feels compelled to buy a copy of the book, they are still available. There's only 6 or 7 left, I think, but that's out there. Here's my contact information. If anybody has anything about Northern Kentucky history you'd like to share, I'm going to maintain a record of Northern Kentucky scouting history to share with the council long from now when I'm out of scouting and enjoying retirement. But I really just appreciate the opportunity to share all of this information with you, and thank you for entertaining my passion into this project, and happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Okay, well, great job. And it seems like our house is still in one piece, even though we're both still sitting here at our computers. So that's a bonus. And we do have a couple questions. I am going to start with, I know that you mentioned so many different camps. Charlie Jacobson was wondering, where is Camp Superior located? And maybe it would help to just kind of outline, sort of the different ones, because there are multiple locations.
Yeah, Camp Superior, I'm going to get the exact neighborhood wrong, but it was up off Montgomery Road. So it would have been north of 275, not too far from Loveland, where Camp Friedlander is.
Cool, thank you. And let's see, there's another, there's some fun notes in the chat, just so you know, Shane, about people sharing their experiences. You did not know Pat Rafferty camped at Camp Powderhorn. So I told him we need to find out more about that. And let's see, we've got another note. Oh, Pat was wondering if you could talk about the Statue of Liberty at Camp Michaels. I
can't, actually. I don't know that story.
Oh, okay.
So Pat, we'll have to get together and talk on that one.
Let's see. Lots of notes and well wishes. So definitely thankful for all of that. I'm trying to look on. Oh, we didn't do a quiz.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So the answer.
Wait. Remind everybody what the question was.
Okay. To the question, who was the only Eagle Scout president? It was Gerald Ford.
All right. We had a number of people get the right answer. Let's see here. So we're going to give the prize today to, I'm going to go with 3 people. How's that sound, Shane?
Sounds great.
Okay. So the first 3 to get the answer right. Actually, I'm going to go with 4. We've got a big bag of pins. So Blanche Sullivan, Carl Coucher, maybe, Marion McGowan, and Elijah Rourke. Congratulations, you guys all got the answer within the same minute. So I feel like that's a tie. So we will write your names down. You probably put your address, hopefully, in the registration. So Blanche, we know your address. But for the others, if you didn't, just send me a message privately in the chat, and we will make sure that you get, we didn't talk about it, but the winners of the quiz get one of our History Hour buttons and bragging rights, of course, right? Okay, so Shane, other questions were, I mean, you talked about this a little bit, but, I think it's just really important to mention again that, I know you and you are not a historian by trade. So, I mean, how accessible were these documents that you were working with?
Varying degrees. The council, like I mentioned, the Danbury Council staff was so generous with opening up their archives and letting us dig into this. I mean, obviously we were doing this for a council project, but still that was a lot of access to paperwork that was very fragile that they entrusted us to take care of. So that part was probably the hardest to get a hold of. but all the references and all the references to Camp Hill, that was almost exclusively found in public record and publicly accessible information. There, in the council records, there was a noticeable gap of the Northern Kentucky council history, or excuse me, not council history, but council records. Those were not maintained. Some of the other smaller councils from the north were better preserved, and the Cincinnati Council had pretty well preserved records. But probably with as many times as it moved in all those locations, I think a lot of the Northern Kentucky records were lost. But yeah, I can't tell you how much information is available in our public library. If you don't know Dave Schroeder's done a great couple presentations for us. But the operation, his team down there are so helpful. And you know, if you don't know how to use an enlarging machine on slides, they will spend the time with you to teach you how to do it. There are books, you know, on Northern Kentucky history that have been written in the last couple of years that have been very helpful. That's where I learned the tidbit about LD Brady's Lake down in Morning View. That was preserved in the Northern Kentucky Encyclopedia, which is a massive book if you haven't looked through that, and a true encyclopedia on our region's heritage and history.
A couple more questions came in. So first of all, Paul Weisenberger, who is a regular attendee for History Hours, was talking about he camped at Camp Michael's. And so it's just very cool, I think, to see how many people have ties to this topic. But Greg Barth was wondering, where did you say Camp Wells was? It was the one that you mentioned was owned and maintained as a cattle farm. I think it maybe had a different name, and he's wondering if they're open to scouters curious about the camp.
That's Camp Hill. That's where Larry Maxey's farm is today. It's a active cattle farm in operation. I've not actually been able to schedule time to go down there. The Maxey family, like I said, it's an active farm and they're very busy managing that operation. But Larry was very open to work with me on this research and share a lot of things with me. He doesn't have if I remember correctly, he doesn't have a formal tie to scouting. So he didn't have any reason to preserve all this stuff, but he just did. One of the things that was noteworthy, one of the plaques that was discovered on the property was on the top of the hill, and he discovered it hiking one day. And he's also come across some bridges that were built across little creeks or depressions in the hillside. And just because it's cattle farm and just cows walking around it, most of those kind of things are still in place. Obviously, the dining hall is not there, but the lake is the same shape as you can see in the original map. So it's pretty easy to find. I would encourage you, though, go for a drive down there and think of being a scout, getting off at where the railroad is and walking up to camp. It's just kind of a surreal experience. And Morning View hasn't developed a whole lot since that time. And you can really get a sense walking past the church, what it would have been like for a scout to get off a train and go to camp in that day and age.
Very cool. There's just a couple of other notes that I want to mention in the chat. Timothy Brown says the George W. Hill postcard and patch from 1938 were actually belong to him. He's the one that put those images on the web. So thank you very much for that. And then Bill Gray says if you do a Google search on Camp Superior, it will show you the location of the previous camp.
I'll have to give a shout out to Bill. Bill is an excellent researcher as well. He helped do a lot of fundamental research with our Ohio camps and was a great part of the committee that wrote the book. So
very cool. I just want to mention we do have some folks listening on Facebook. And so Lori Baker says her mother was a Boy Scout leader in the 1960s. So very cool. So many people with ties. Well, unfortunately, our time has come to an end. But Shane, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. And for those of you that are maybe you're regular on here with us, Northern Kentucky History Hour weekly, or maybe this is your first time, we hope, whatever the case, you join us next week. And we will actually be going in a little bit of a different direction. But we will be interviewing the curator and some of the staff from Vent Haven Museum here in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. And they will be giving us a virtual tour. So thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I almost forgot. But so they'll give us some history of Vent Haven, how it came to be with their founder, And then I don't know about you, but I haven't been inside yet. So I'm extremely excited to get the virtual tour of Bent Haven as well. So join us next week. And we actually have a pretty cool lineup for you guys throughout all the way till March already planned. So it should be a fun spring. For all of us on the NKY History Hour team, I would just say thank you again. Make sure to check out Behringer-Crawford's website, bcmuseum.org, and the Facebook page. We are constantly adding new content from our curator of collections, Jason French. He's doing curator chats at least weekly, I think sometimes more, on various artifacts and other historic items throughout our region. So definitely check in for those. And we really appreciate you joining us. Have a great night. Thanks.
Thank you all.